Miranda Report, Season 1, Episode 29.
Yikes, we're nearly the end of the first series.
We should have ended it at 25, but I forgot.
Well, I thought we were going to end it at 30 originally.
Maybe we'll keep going till 50. I'm not
Well,
sure.
no. Well, it gives us an opportunity to make some changes, surely. And kind of...
Change presenters.
You think you can get rid of me?
No.
Well, how will they change the presenters then?
Don't get paranoid.
Oh, is my number up? Have I been trussed?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Anyway, so I thought today we'd kind of hot off the recent malaise that is the British economy. We would an interesting subject. The question being, what would happen if we legalised or decriminalised Class A drugs or drugs generally?
Why do you say Class A drugs?
Well, I'm talking about those ones that, because of course these days lots of people, how can I say, get hooked and smashed out of their merry skulls on prescription drugs, on legitimate prescriptions like opioids and whatever. We've got an opioid epidemic in this country now, I notice. But the point being, you know, the drugs, those illicit drugs like cannabis and what have you, what would happen if we legalised them or decriminalised them? And would it help to solve some of the issues that we've got economically? Because obviously a nice big fat tax take.
But what are you including in that?
Well, I don't know. That's
crack?
just the
Crack, heroin.
Well, crack is cocaine, of course.
But
So
you include in that?
Well, I'm throwing it out there as to what would happen. How we're going to discuss it, because you know, obviously not all of them necessarily lumped together. You might say, okay, what should we do? Should we go down the route, for example, of legalising cannabis? As really it has been in a lot of the states of America, Canada. The rules have changed in places like Spain.
Yeah, but I don't think you can buy heroin.
Well, no.
So maybe we should try and figure out which
ones. So
like maybe some should
the first point.
But then maybe some should be legalised and others should be decriminalised. I think it's fair to say that if you have a heroin addiction,
yes,
you shouldn't go to jail for it unless you're distributing, which is different.
Right.
But if you're consuming things like crack and heroin and fentanyl,
I don't know.
It's the Chinese synthetic heroin. It's like 100 times more.
Oh,
fentanyl.
Method.
No.
There's another
fentanyl.
One. Fentanyl. There's another one. Is there?
Which is the most powerful opioid known to man.
Right. Okay.
And
so
a lot of people
heroin is an opioid, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
And fentanyl is 100 times that.
Right. Okay.
Considering you've done an episode on drugs, you should know these things because you would have done.
Well, I do. I'm kind of playing a bit of devil's advocate, allowing you to kind of explain the finer points of your own knowledge, rather than me sticking my big fat oar in all the time.
So you do know what fentanyl is, then?
I have heard of fentanyl. I wasn't aware, for example,
you've done it.
It was 100. No, well, I haven't done it.
Well, maybe in hospital you might have been prescribed.
But I've never been in hospital where I've had to stay over.
Have you not?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. I've never stayed overnight. Thank God.
But so, let's say if you have a heroin addiction, should you end up in prison for it, or should you be given medical assistance and then the ability to find a way to come off it and then sort of start your life over again? Right. That sounds more like a medical issue as opposed to a criminal issue.
I can't.
When it comes to cannabis, as long as it's in its true form and not synthetic or strengthened or anything like that,
yeah, then
the ability to, let's say, consume it and or grow a small amount for yourself, as they do in a lot of Caribbean countries, for example, where you can grow. I think in Antigua you can grow up to 8 plants for your own consumption.
8 plants.
8 plants.
No matter how big the plants are.
Well, 8 plants.
8 plants.
Which I'm assuming should be enough.
I would have thought 8 plants
Right.
was
But then they
quite a
still,
lot.
but then they still have a big issue of criminality when it comes to cannabis, for example.
Right. Okay.
Still even though it's decriminalised,
right,
and you can grow your own plants, there's still a lot of import and export of the drug cross borders. Which is a huge issue.
Why do you think that is? Do you think sort of people are smoking the one plant, one plant's crop, and selling the other 6?
No. There are criminals that have huge operations,
right?
And
so they're exporting.
Yeah.
Exporting to countries.
Yeah.
Like us, perhaps.
Probably.
Although I think I read somewhere that 45% of the global cannabis is grown right here in the UK.
Yeah, but under medical licensing.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But so you're saying that those people who have got huge criminal interests, are exporting the stuff.
Well, like cartels, for example, cartels in Mexico have shifted from marijuana to fentanyl.
Because it's a higher margin.
Much higher margin,
yeah.
And much easier to produce. 1 kilo of fentanyl is the equivalent of, like, money-wise, of like a ton or more of marijuana.
Right.
And it's much easier to move across borders.
Well, of course it is. If it's you can get the money all into 1 kilo from
exactly
the equivalent.
So they're changing their business practices because obviously it's more profitable to produce fentanyl than it is weed now.
Right. Okay.
So now obviously weed has become more mainstream. They grow it in California and in other states.
Yeah.
And it's
Canada, of course.
And it's for national consumption.
So there we go. There's our first point then. Should we then in this country, given the financial opportunities for taxation and perhaps because we are, not a net exporter of it from the point of view of criminal gangs, I don't think we export from this country particularly, do we?
I think a lot of synthetic drugs come from here.
Right, okay. Do you think we should legalise? So, let's make that the first point then. Do you think we should legalise or decriminalise cannabis?
Legalise cannabis.
Okay.
In its true form. So I have to make that caveat.
So you can grow your own.
I don't think they'd allow that here.
Okay. So you could buy it.
Well, then essentially
you could buy it
you'd be taking away the taxation aspect.
Right. Okay.
So assuming that our government would never allow such a thing, but they would potentially legalise it, have it sold in specific outlets.
Yeah.
And then it's taxed at source.
Yeah.
If it happens like it is in the US, you have to go through a huge amount of paperwork. You have to buy a license, which is expensive.
Right.
You then have to
license to sell it.
The license to sell it. Then you have to meet a lot of criteria, which also costs a lot of money to actually have, like a retail unit. You need to have security in place. You need to have other things in place, which is also quite expensive.
Yeah.
I think they still have an issue that a lot of banks won't allow you to open an account because it's an illicit substance. And there's the issue of, the federal government has legalised it, but then the state might not have.
State legislators.
But
a lot of states have, though, of course.
No, some have, some haven't. But
it's about half and half, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's like a grey area.
Yeah.
There's a grey area when it comes to that. Well, I don't think we'd have that issue in the UK because we don't have that two-state. We don't have that two-governmental system. We don't have that same national and state. We don't have that. No. So we should eliminate that.
So do you think then that there would be a benefit to the Treasury if we legalise cannabis here and properly legalised it and got over ourselves about the fact that perhaps there's a lot more people using it than they realise? And do they, when are we going to get hold, remove this premise, this falseness that cannabis is a gateway drug, as they say. That if you start on cannabis, you're going to end up on smack, which of course is a complete misnomer, or some other.
I think the issue is more that sort of some of the stronger strains,
right?
There's still research happening as to whether or not it can cause psychosis if abused.
Right.
Well, that tends to be the case if you consume it at an earlier age.
Yeah.
Because if your brain is not developed, if your brain is not adequately developed enough, and you abuse it as you would do with any other drug, it can cause psychosis and other sort of mental conditions.
Yes, it can.
Down the line,
permanently change the pathways in an unmatured.
Correct. I mean,
brain.
Just as if
men's brains don't mature until about the age between 23 and 25. I think female brains mature a bit earlier, although one could argue that where Liz Truss is concerned, of course.
But you have the issue whereby you have to consider, you'd have to regulate it as you would cigarettes or alcohol.
Yeah, of course.
Age limits.
Yeah.
You'd need to have something in place for those who abuse the drug as well.
Right.
Whether it's rehab programs or things like that, you need to have something in place to just sort of have a secure kind of bubble around.
Do you think it needs to be when so many people are doing it recreationally anyway and functioning normally as you would expect them to? Because let's be about right. It's not exactly.
But it's for those who do abuse it. You don't have to worry about the people that
don't abuse it.
That are moderate.
But like alcohol, really.
Just like alcohol.
So
you've got the 12-step process. You can go to NHS and you can
but arguably it's less dangerous than alcohol.
Agreed. It's far less dangerous than alcohol.
Yeah. So why, if there's a benefit to reducing crime and a benefit to the Treasury, aren't we going, hey, there's an opportunity being missed here? Is it just that whole morality question that nobody wants to be the politician or the government that goes, come on, let's do it? And, what are they waiting for is my question.
I have no idea. Yeah. I think clearly there are people that, I don't know. I really don't know. There must be a moral issue behind it. I don't understand it myself.
I don't get it. Especially as we know now that it can help.
That's a hell of a ring, by the way. Where did that come from? Sorry, as an aside, it's like I can't stop looking at the thing.
He is looking at the thing that I am wearing on my finger.
Where did that come from?
Anybody gets the wrong idea.
Nice
ring. Yeah. Do you like that? It's rather nice.
It's hard not to notice it, Si.
Yeah. Matt's actually got the same ring.
That's not a wedding ring, surely.
No. That's a wedding ring.
Okay, so just where did that thing come from?
We bought them. We were on holiday.
Were you high?
No, not at all. I like it.
I'm joking.
I like a bit of jewellery there.
Well,
I'm gay. Of course, I like a bit of jewellery.
Oh.
I
was just wondering.
It stands to reason, doesn't it?
I was just curious.
And the thing is, you notice when you do these things. I was tidying up last week. I decided to rejig a few. I think, God, I've got all this jewellery and I don't wear it. So maybe I should wear it a bit more. I've got some chunky shit as well. But I haven't got that sort of line of sovereign rings that people wear, The ones that have tattoos on them. It's mum and dad.
Back to the topic.
But anyway, back to the topic. So we legalise cannabis. We think that's a good idea.
Not synthetic, though, because the synthetic stuff is really...
Tell me about synthetic cannabis.
Well,
you seem to know the difference. I mean, if it's put in front of me, I just go, aye, no, it's cannabis.
You'd notice.
In what
it's much more potent.
Yeah.
And the effects can be quite aggressive, let's put it that way.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things you've got to be very careful. Some younger kids have ended up in hospital for consuming it.
Literally just consuming it?
Yeah.
So there's obviously something in it that makes you ill?
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't that another good reason then to legalise
I agree.
drugs right across the board? Because I remember, of course, the days of clubs, nightclubs, raves, and ecstasy, and what have you. And it seemed to me that back in the 90s, for a while there, that how can I say, there was a better quality, and that somehow clamping down on all of this stuff has meant there's a lack of control on the product, and yet the product is still being sold because there's a demand for it. So if there's a demand for something, is the whole approach of just making it criminal perhaps the wrong method for the wrong issue?
That's the point. I think you still need to consider things like heroin or crack, things like that.
Cocaine, I think, is a really insidious.
But potentially that should still be criminalised.
Yeah.
As in, at least distribution should be criminalised,
Oh,
but
absolutely,
consumption potentially decriminalised, with a view that sort of you need to just have more places whereby you can go to seek help if you need it. And that the automatic response shouldn't be
banning,
jail time.
Right. No, I agree.
Because jail time doesn't resolve the issue. It's a health issue.
So, yeah.
But the sale and distribution of it should still be a criminal act.
Yeah.
And then things like, and then I don't know, where do you stand with things like ecstasy or hippie crack, which a lot of kids now, they become zombies off that stuff. They take a hit of that nitrous oxide, helium.
The stuff that's in that I see littered about the streets. Those little tiny silver canisters, which are
and that'll knock you out for like 10 minutes. And you see these people. There are lots of videos where you see like kids, 14, 15 years old. They'll take a hit. They'll stiff as a board. They collapse and they sort of like off to la la land for 10 minutes. But that can cause brain damage. That's really, really serious.
Really serious stuff.
But you can get it anywhere.
Well,
so what about that?
Well, funnily enough, I've never seen it about. What I have seen is that after there's been an event on Victoria Park here, Victoria Park, Hackney people, that you can walk around the streets, and the streets are absolutely littered with these sodding canisters. And so it tells you how big the problem is.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not for banning things generally, because it seems to me that if people want to do it, they will find a way, so you're not really altering the problem.
But the harder you make it...
But well, I don't know. Does the fact that alcohol is so easily accessible doesn't mean that everybody becomes a drunk? And although I do think alcohol is a massive problem.
But then, we should.
What do we do?
We should talk about alcohol and cigarettes in the same vein, though. Maybe we should, like they do in Norway, for example, you can only buy alcohol through the state, and you have a certain amount of. Is that you or me?
That's my stomach.
There is a certain amount of units you're allowed per month, and once you use up your for consumption at home,
right.
So we have to make that distinction.
So how do you
get a number of units?
Right.
So you have to go to the store. You consume your units and you can bring it back home.
What about people sell their units on?
No, you can't.
Can you do that?
Mm-mm. So it's all done via ID.
All done via ID. So there's no way of corrupting it.
Not as far as I know. I'm sure there's probably a way of doing it, but not as far as I know.
So what you're saying to me then is it's like, okay, you're allowed your 21 units of alcohol for a month.
Yeah.
So that is a...
And then it just replenishes the next month. But you can still go down to the pub or whatever it is and get smashed if you want. But it'll cost you a bunch of money because obviously it's super expensive.
Okay.
So if anything, it should be like, there's the sugar tax on fizzy drinks.
Right.
So maybe as they do with cigarettes, they should just make alcohol progressively more expensive.
Well,
just to deter people a little bit more.
But it doesn't seem to work, does it? Deterring people by cost barrier doesn't seem to work, because what they end up doing is gravitating to the lowest possible denominator in terms of taste and quality to get the actual units of alcohol down. So as I said, people find a way, don't they, even if something is eminently against the law. But should we start with education? But don't we need to be getting into people's heads that, for example, cocaine is really, really physically dangerous?
Yeah, but we've talked about this in the last podcast. It's not for the government to tell you what to do.
Right.
These are things you either find out for yourself, or you learn from your family or your parents. These things can't be taught in school.
There's another argument that is used when people talk about legalising drugs, and that is would it make more addicts? What's your take on that? Do you think we'd end up with...
Absolutely not. We've already seen it, like you said, with Portugal. You know, the level of drug use went up marginally, and that was it. And then it sort of stabilised.
Right.
You know, in fact, because they also had a big program of sort of how do you call it when you get people off drugs? Rehabilitation. You know, they on one side they
were prepared.
Yeah, so they legalised on one side, but then they also had the health services on the other side.
Right.
So they did both in tandem. And when you do that, at least you sort of...
Yes, because you're prepared for some outcome.
You're trying to resolve both issues.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you do that, at least you're preparing yourself for any outcomes that might happen down the line.
You could apply the argument that a lot of young people do something and choose to do something because it's illicit. That somehow there's a little,
With this generation, though, tends not to be the case.
Right.
There's lower alcohol consumption, there's lower cigarette usage consumption.
But there's still quite a lot of illicit drug use.
Still drug
so they're just finding
alternatives.
Different... Yeah. And of course, there's a lot more variety.
Yeah.
Personal opinion, I'm for decriminalising it, because at the end of the day, I just think this whole war on drugs is a complete and utter waste of time. And perhaps you'd have a bit more chance of controlling it all if it was decriminalised, away from the gangs and away from crime.
If you can get the criminality side down, county lines, which is obviously a big issue in the UK,
massive.
If you can cut that down, even by a fraction, it's got to be worth it. You know, at least only on the cannabis side.
Yeah, because
it'll take a lot of the lowest lying criminality off the streets altogether.
Yeah.
If you can't sell a bag to your local community, you resolve an issue.
I think we started off this segment by saying about the opioid epidemic. So people at the moment are accessing a really serious, creating a really serious drug problem for themselves by legitimate means through prescription. So,
well, no, but like I said, fentanyl, for example, they produce illicitly,
and yes,
and it can be easily done.
The prescription opioid epidemic that we've got, and of course, is particularly bad in the States, is something that the state is involved in.
Yeah, but okay,
effectively.
But if you're prescribed it because you need it, how do you stop its consumption?
Why is it suddenly needed now when it wasn't needed before?
It was always needed, wasn't it?
Well, no, we didn't have an opioid epidemic before. The level of power of these drugs wasn't quite as...
But if you prescribed it and you consumed it...
Well, a lot of people prescribed a lot of stuff that they don't really need, that they could, if they made some alterations to lifestyle or otherwise, could improve their lot without needing to always fill themselves with one pill or another. Isn't that part of the whole issue?
But opioids are for pain management.
Yes, exactly.
So if you're in pain, what alternative do you have?
Well, if I'm in pain...
Stay in pain, or...
Well, no. It's like you've got to get to the bottom of whatever is in there. You have people that are suffering pain, but don't do anything to manage that pain via another way. For example, if I have a headache, I can be damn sure, not that anybody give me an opioid for a headache, but rather than take a paracetamol or another headache tablet, I'd look to say, okay, what's causing my headache? And usually it's something, tightness somewhere else or some other issue that then is eminently resolvable without reaching for the tablets in the drawer.
Yeah, but your GP doesn't have time for that.
So they're just doling the pills out and contributing to an addiction.
They only resolve the issue.
Yeah.
They don't look at the reasoning behind it and try to find an answer for that.
No. They just
you're in pain,
become legalised drug peddlers.
Essentially, in some cases, not in all, but
so that's the reality. So if that's the case, then why is cannabis illegal if that can be used just as sensibly for some sorts of pain management and not end up with the patient on some horrible opioid addiction?
Because according to certain government studies, there are no medical benefits to cannabis as far as they're concerned.
Still, I'm peddling this argument when it looks as though it's fairly clear that there's been some benefit.
According to you, maybe, but according to others, it's a different story.
Right.
And you can't. It's not that easy to change that.
No.
Do you think you need to get beyond that?
Do you think there'll come a time where we're looking back at this time or a generation going when it's all changed and decriminalised? Do you think that's ever going to be a possibility, or do you think?
Yeah, it's coming. Bear in mind, even what was it back in the 20s and 30s? They were using hemp, to build panels for cars.
Yeah.
Cannabis was actually legal.
Yes.
At that time, in fact, in the US, they linked it to the black community.
Yeah.
And then made it illegal, claiming that sort of this wacky backy was turning people into sort of, what's the best way to call it?
Chilled out folk who didn't want to cause any trouble, I would imagine, and just bake.
No. In fact, the opposite. They said it was turning people into lunatics
But that's always been a false argument, isn't it?
And monsters and all that kind of
where
thing.
Cannabis is concerned.
Yeah.
You're more likely.
But it was tied.
You're more likely to raid your fridge than attack your neighbour.
But it was tied to the black community and seen as a negative.
Right.
It was peddled as a negative.
Because they were enjoying themselves.
Yeah, it was pushed into the social psyche.
Yeah.
That this is bad gateway drug. It turns you into a zombie. It
doesn't do you any good. As a gateway.
I know. Look at this sector of community and look how they are. Do you want to end up like that, for example?
Yeah.
And good marketing campaign turned what was relatively innocuous into into something else.
As it has with so many things.
Absolutely.
Well,
but if anything, alcohol is probably the most dangerous drug of all.
Insidious substance.
But there's no issues with that apparently. Why not?
Well, because
a lot of money comes.
A lot of money involved for tax. That's the point.
And as long as the money's coming in, there's no issue.
There seems to be a bit of a contradiction.
Hugely so.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I mean, obviously, I don't want to sit here and go, "Oh, yes, let's all take lots of drugs and legalise it," because then we'll become very unpopular very quickly with a certain section of the community that don't agree with us. It's hence why, really, it's a question because people all up and down the country, everywhere, should be asking themselves this question: what if it wasn't, criminal? Would it make turn us all into zombies? Or would it really make very little difference? I think the latter.
Do we have a quote for the day?
Well...
Not on this one either.
Not really, no. Except,
have you been
have a good afternoon and get high. But let me have a look. I'm not sure whether I did write a quote actually for this. I think I thought I might have done. And then, of course, because we... Oh, no.
Oh, you did? See. Okay, go on then.
There we go. I did have a quote, you see. So, my apologies, everybody. I was sort of in
Get on with
There's
it,
a flux
Si.
there.
Quote of the day.
My quote of the day, actually, interestingly enough, was an anonymous quote. I couldn't find who it was attributed to, despite looking. Although I actually think it was.
Can you just go on with it?
I think it might have been Damon Albarn.
Okay, so the quote of the day is:
In the 60s, people took drugs to make the world weird. Now the world is weird. People take Prozac to make it look normal. There you go. And on that note, have a great afternoon.